Hello, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Eliminating Digital Drag to Move into the Modern Work and Generative AI Fastlane. I'm Sebastian Holst with Microsoft, and I'm delighted to have David Brodeur-Johnson from Forrester. David, welcome.
Thanks, Sebastian. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Can I ask you just share a little bit about your background and before we dive in?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I've been with Forrester for about 12 years, which is hard for me to believe. It's longer than I've been anywhere. But for 10 of those, I've focused on employee experience and employee engagement, and part of that is collaboration. But for me, it's through the lens of organizational behavior and psychological research. Under what circumstances will people choose to show up and not only choose to stay, but do the best work that they're capable of because they want to? So, and technology plays a big role in that. And prior to Forrester, I managed several product lines for Silicon Valley tech companies, a lot of them in the end user computing space. And so, this whole area for me is an area of passion and of a lot of research over time. So, I'm looking forward to sharing the results of some of the work that we've done here with you today. So, thanks for that.
Awesome. Thank you, David. So let's talk about that. I had the good fortune of meeting David, developing a research paper on effectively what was working and not so much for enterprises in the years that followed the pandemic. But what started out as more of a retrospective actually ended up producing a number of insights that are in fact extremely relevant in today's changing world of, as we say, modern work and generative AI. It's those insights gleaned from, as the slide sort of indicates, over 1,000 enterprises across North America, UK, France, Germany, that actually also brings us here today. So what I'm going to do is sort of use my fast-talking New York voice to quickly sort of rip through what we learned so that we can get to the what I would call the important bit, and that's what you can do about what we learned. So the first row here sort of introduces a term, digital drag, and we're using that to capture effectively the aggregate of issues, friction, coming from really any kind of limitation in tools, data access, or processes. What the survey showed is that this digital drag, this aggregate, is in fact incredibly widespread. 9 out of 10 respondents told us so. The survey also showed, though, that digital drag comes in many forms, and a lot of these will probably be familiar to you. Context switching, distributed team friction, getting the right apps for the job at hand, or getting the right data at the right time. One thing that's worth noting on this one little slide is that no one point of friction hit even over 50% of the respondents, yet over 90%, in fact, feel this pain, right? So what that's telling you is that this is widely distributed, but also quite variable. The next question, though, of course, is how serious is this? Should we care? Do we care? The survey showed that, in fact, the penalties are extremely real. Respondents indicated that they spend an average of 40% of their time in a workday doing things other than what they define their core job, doing things other than what they define as their core job. So that's 40%, right? So 2 days out of 5. But for me, where the data actually got really interesting and insightful is that it shows that the penalty actually varies. It's not 40%. It's not a flat tax. In fact, the top performing 20% had only a 19% overhead, whereas the poorest performing 20%, and again, we're talking about over 1,000 organizations. So this is a big slice, even though it's top and bottom 20%. The poorest performing spent 68% of their time, or had 60% of their time siphoned away. So that means quickly a team of 5 working 40 hours in a week could only complete 64 hours of core work versus the top performing can do 162 hours, right?
Sebastian, it's important. Yeah, it's important to point out. I mean, that 60% is outside of their control as individuals, right? This is the overhead drag. So I just want to point that out. Even if they come to work with a great attitude, they're still going to face this drag. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No. That's exactly right. And that though for me, and I don't want to speak for David, he's right here, but I think it begged two questions for us, right? What can we do to predict, right, when an org is likely to fall, or where they're likely to fall across the spectrum, right? And what can we do to ensure that we end up on the right side of that equation, right? And so what we looked at the data pretty hard, all of us, and what we found, though, that there wasn't one killer problem. There wasn't one sort of death blow. In fact, it wasn't any specific issue. It was the total count. So if you think of like true aerodynamics, right, is the more points of friction that an organization had, the more likely they were to fall at the bottom end of that performance, right? So that then brings us at long last to back to David. Let me just advance one more slide. And what I'm going to show you next, audience, is just a literal, almost a cut and paste from the report, which, by the way, we will share a link to an interactive site where you can play with the data even a little bit. So this is just straight out of the paper, Forrester Consulting recommendations. But I'm going to stop monologuing. I think I did my New York sprint for today. And I'm going to ask you, Dave, so given this sort of these insights, what did you take away with it? What should you do with this to make a difference?
I took these in. First of all, the results of the study were very much in line with what we have learned in other areas of our research. So, it was pretty consistent with those things. But I to form the perspective and the recommendations that we're making here, I know that the recommendations can sound a little bit like motherhood and apple pie. So let me elaborate on these a little bit in terms of exactly what we mean. But this is informed by also the hundreds of conversations I have with people every year, both in terms of research interviews, but also in terms of the inquiry calls that our clients will set up on our calendar. As analysts, a big part of what we do is answer questions for people. And by the time that a client of ours has waited for 2 or 3 weeks to get on our calendars, because we're always busy, they've usually exhausted search engines and everything else, and so their questions are usually pretty good. And so that gives us a perspective. It gives us an informed perspective of what's going on. And so when I say something like assess your current app inventory and identify the gaps and pain points, what that really means is put yourself in the shoes of the people that have a job to do, the people that are actually using the applications that you've got, and they're trying to get things done from day to day, and try to understand their jobs to be done. And that's the only way that I know to assess whether or not the application and the information environment is really suitable for the job that people have to do. Is it convenient, or is there a lot of friction, or do they have the information that they need at hand when they're working on a screen or working on something to be able to proceed with whatever that next step is, or do they have to go someplace else? And so when we say assess, what we're really talking about here is assessing the fitness of the applications and the design for the purpose that people are using them for, and understanding what that pain may look like or where the gaps are. And it fits really well with the next recommendation, which is adopting a user-centric and data-driven approach to designing and updating your apps. What we mean by user-centric is, again, going back and understanding jobs to be done, what that human is really trying to do. I'll give you a good example. Did some work with a client of ours who has a human-centered design lab in Pittsburgh, and so went into the lab and spent a couple of days working through exercises. One of the problems that they had that brought us there was they tried repeatedly to create a digital thermostat that had a complete, that could compete with some of the other offerings that were out there on the market, with a whole app experience and automated settings and so on. And they continued to fail, and they were blaming the technology environment for that. And so what we did over the course of a couple of days was bring in a hand-selected group of people who were the ones responsible for the product strategy, the ones who were responsible for the execution of the product and everything else, and put them through a series of exercises and watch through one-way glass what happened basically when they tried to execute these things with the technology environment that they had. And we just watched as they hit the wall. The basic things like they didn't have first of all, nobody in the team had industrial design expertise, which is one of the things that they knew that they needed. But not only that, they didn't know who in the company had that expertise that they could tap into. So an information source that they needed would have been the skills, right, that people have within the organization. Who can I reach out to learn what I need to know to be able to make the right decisions with respect to this product strategy and design, and a whole bunch of other things that we just learned by watching this go. And it totally redefined the way that they thought about the application environment for the things that the work that people are actually doing. And I think that was really important, is they understood through that what was really needed in the moment for people to be successful with the tools that they were using. And that's what we're trying to say here, is by
Well,
user centric. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think what's important here is that um, this applies equally, not just to building something new,
Right.
but to sort of attempting or endeavoring to take a quantum leap in an existing ecosystem and a business infrastructure.
Right.
Right? I like to say that in certainly in enterprises, projects never have the luxury of starting at the beginning. Right? They always start in the middle because
That's right.
you're in full flight. Your people are working, they're using stuff, and their operations. They can't just stop and reset.
Yeah.
And so ideally, when you're approaching this problem, not only do you want to leverage what you've already invested in and hopefully reuse things, ideally you want an approach that takes those existing investments and existing knowledge and actually creates an advantage
That's right.
versus making it neutral. Like, why sell out? Like, make it an advantage when you're doing this pivot. And again, we'll get to this, I think, towards the end. But again, sort of the point here is, when confronted with something like generative AI that can saturate every aspect of a business and a supply chain and a customer interaction, you want an approach that not only doesn't throw out all the stuff you've done, but actually uses the stuff you've done to give you, hopefully, an unfair advantage. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good. I mean, think of it like a continuous improvement process. You're starting
Mhm.
with where you are. I mean, you are where you are, whatever you have for your app environment. It's a matter of saying, okay, what can we do here that's going to significantly change how effective these tools are for people to use? And what things can we add to it? Generative AI is a good example, right? If you can present people with the information that they need in that moment through a generative AI process to make it easier for them to complete whatever task needs to happen, huge, right? That's an enormous, time and cost savings, time savings for them, and ultimately a cost savings in labor. But when we think about things like cloud and AI and low code platforms, this is really what we're talking about. And you can use low code platforms to rethink the user interface that you have. You don't necessarily have to be stuck with the way things come as they are, and you can put together a user experience around people's jobs to be done, right? That really matches what they're trying to do and is much more user friendly, and assembles the information that they need to be able to do that. And this is what drives efficiency. I mean, you think about people working in a call center, just a classic example of this. What they need in the moment to be able to answer the diverse questions that are coming in. Usually, they've got to go search for and find stuff and look all over the place. It's really inefficient for them to do that, so they don't end up doing it. And then they don't really answer the question for the customer because it's not convenient for them to do so, or it would take too much time and they'd hit their metrics the wrong way. And so it doesn't happen. So this is the anatomy of people not being able to be successful because the technology environment is not conducive to their success to do that. So I've just seen some really good things when companies take this seriously and really rethink that experience, environment experience for them. And to do that, when we say embracing a culture of experimentation and innovation, you might have a hypothesis going into this about what needs to happen. You might have heard from your employees in their surveys, or you might have done some journey mapping work or some other things that will give you some ideas. But you won't really know if you've picked the right things and in your hypothesis is right until you have a chance to experiment with it and innovate around what this really looks like and try things out. Make that a quick cycle. This is really what Agile's all about. But creating a culture where that's okay, and continuing to improve and continuing to experiment is really the idea here. And you can measure this. For the first time now, we've got the kinds of instrumentation in the apps that we use and the platforms that we use to be able to understand behavior, right? Watching how people use different apps, and they go here to internet and they look for something. It's not there. That kind of stuff can give you insight into where people are getting stuck, where the friction is, or where the digital drag is. And you can instrument things and use the APIs that are there to get insights into that, and look at how well people are able to collaborate with each other, or maybe what's inhibiting their ability to be able to do that. But this work and taking these steps through these recommendations is going to give you a completely new understanding of what's really going on, and help you set priorities the correct way, maybe for the first time, because you have truly understood the problem that you're trying to solve in a new way. And that's really the idea. And so there's a whole lot of neuroscience research behind this as well. I've done a lot of work in this area, interviewed folks who are neuroscientists that are experts in user interface design, and also in enterprise app design. What can we do to reduce that cognitive load of what it takes somebody to actually get their job done? Most organizations don't even think about that, but those that do have a huge advantage in terms of overall efficiency and effectiveness of the people that are working there. So it's worth the time.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a thought on this sort of almost meta topic,
Yeah.
which is generative AI, Copilot, or ChatGPT, or any of the sort of big movers right now. They still tend to deliver one-to-one experiences. In other words, Copilot is your personal assistant,
Right.
right? But there is another dimension, which is, and there's a lot of I use a sports analogy, right? Pumping up and making each individual team member, maximizing them is not the way you have a winning team, right? So you have famously, U.S. hockey, beating a man-to-man comparison, a team far superior, a number of teams,
Right.
and you have the reverse, right? You have the what was it, the U.S. Dream Team basketball, that lost, I think to, I don't know, two South American, I can't remember the two countries, but they weren't supposedly the dream teams, right? And there you had, everybody was a superstar, right?
Yeah.
And so knowing that the same orchestration that can anticipate and remove friction from an individual,
Yeah.
needs to, I think, be applied to effective collaboration, the design around collaboration. Again, coming full circle, because when you have poor collaboration, that's highly stressful for the
Yeah.
individual
That's
as
right.
well, right? So if we can all go 5 times faster in opposite directions, that's actually worse than when I was just going more slowly in an
Oh, yeah.
opposite direction.
Yeah. We got to be coordinated.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that particularly, or just this notion of the people, coordination, communication, that's not going away. Like
Right.
that remains at the center of
For sure.
any organization.
Yeah, for sure. So there's an interesting answer to this observation, Sebastian, in my opinion, and that is that one of the biggest insights we've learned in the employee experience research is that employee experience peaks when people have good days at work. So when I go out and speak about this to an audience and I can actually get the feedback live in real time, I'll ask people, how do you want to feel when you leave work every day? And the hands go up and they say, I want to feel like I made a difference. I want to feel like I accomplished something. I want to feel like I got something done. Yeah, because we know that our job security and psychological safety and everything else is tied to our performance, right? How effective we are. And we're also trading time in our personal lives to be at work. We'd probably rather be doing something else, right? But we want to know that that time is going to some
Not
good.
today, not
Yeah.
today, David. This is right
No,
where
no,
I'm
no. I
going.
was going to just qualify that. Yeah, no. I happen to love what I do, and I will continue to do this probably long into my retirement years because I love it. But I mean, for most folks, it's like
Mhm.
that they want to be able to be successful. So where I'm going with this is creating an environment where people can be successful. Everybody knows, first of all, what's most important to work on, and they can coordinate effectively with each other with the tools that they use, and can collaborate effectively with each other when they do that is a huge uh, gain, right, in their sense of success. both
Mhm, mhm.
individually and in their own sense of self-efficacy, but also as a group, with their teammates. And indeed, right, when we've done the studies and done the interviews and so on to find out things like, um, there's a restaurant chain here in the U.S. That they've been doing customer experience and employee experience work, kind of side by side and survey work. They had certain stores that were performing far better than others in terms of customer experience, right? Customer satisfaction was really high. They looked at the employee data to sort of understand if there were any patterns there between those stores, and sure enough, there were. And it was when people felt like they had a high level of trust and respect for their colleagues. That
Mhm,
was the
mhm.
thing that really stood out, right? When that was really high. Well, it's an emotional process, right? When people are in a good place with their colleagues or in a good place at work, they're going to provide better customer service. They're going to perform better. So the technology environment is really a huge part of that. And by the way, in our own survey data, the strongest tech-related predictor of engagement is satisfied with their internal collaboration technologies. So,
Mhm, mhm.
all these signs, right? All this data, all this evidence points to this reality that we're talking about. And I love that.
Yeah. I was going to say, even in your language, when you said, "Oh, when I come to work or when I leave work," but in
Yeah.
fact, very often we're not coming or leaving to work. We're just working and then not working because we're distributed and remote, right? And one of the top 4 points of friction in our survey was around the difficulty in working in a distributed and remote fashion, right?
Right.
And we didn't qualify in the survey. Is it an emotional drain, to your point, that drags them down and sucks away their energy, or is it just literally technical issues of not being able to connect with a good connection or
Right.
whatever? Intuitively, I would guess it's going to be the former.
It is.
And we've done other research that talks about, when does it make sense to go into work versus stay home, and this notion of moments, to your point, that matter. So you
Right.
come in when other people are going to be in. You come in around particular events that are most likely to drive those type of attributes you just talked about a sense of fulfillment and community and
Yeah.
productivity. So I think that's um, uh, uh, worth noting, right? None of these things live neatly in its own silo. All of these things sort of infect or resonate with one another.
Right. Totally. And it is the technology that we're using, are the tools that we're using, are they promoting that sense of connectedness with each other?
Yeah.
Are they promoting that sense of ease of collaboration? Um,
So yeah.
I
So
mean, can you,
one,
can you imagine working remotely during a pandemic when you didn't have the basic tools of messaging? If you had to depend on email, you
yeah,
can't build relationships that way. You got to be able to build relationships visually, like we're doing right now, right? Through
yeah.
something where you can see other people, you can talk to them in real time. That's a huge one. So
So yeah, and one of the things, again, about starting projects in the middle, right? I mean, there were a few new kinds of businesses that started during the pandemic that have persisted, but for the most part, it was existing businesses that got blindsided, and then how do they sort of recover and adjust, and that's what drove those friction points. And I'm going to just take a liberty. I'm going to forward one slide.
mhm,
Now we have lots of material, collateral, and messaging about um, how sort of effective and transformational Microsoft's Copilot generative AI solution is and can be. But this slide I did in advance because when I mapped it to the friction point. So this is a very specific, this is not a sort of a generic marketing slide, and I don't say that with any disdain. I'm in marketing, but this is specifically mapping how generative AI, Copilot in particular, addresses what were the 4 key friction points that I sped through at the beginning of this session. But again, the paper will be available to everyone at the end. And so, context switching, right? The whole point is that through extensibility, through something we call plugins, you can actually have Copilot actually orchestrate and call. So you don't have to find the application. You don't have to decide which application. You don't have to, pass it the right information to get to where you want to be to open that support ticket or whatever, right? It will just effectively, ideally, eliminate, right, context switching. the distributed team inefficiencies, right? So it's not a magic wand. Those issues still are important, and there's a huge, to your point, psychological dimension to addressing this in a lasting and meaningful way. However, a big part of that friction is when you're out of the loop. So if I miss a meeting, what happened? When was I mentioned? Are there, what were I was so involved in this conversation, I didn't take notes, or I didn't catch who was responsible for what. So you can consume all of this data, recap it, summarize it, and it can also, of course, take out the humdrum, the drudgery of a lot of activities as well through the automation, right? And then ultimately the data. So the tool related and data access piece, just in the interest of time, I'm going to compress into one point and tie it into an earlier point I hope I made, which is your existing investments. So a big part of certainly enterprise investments is not just around going as fast as you can, but it's also about governance, security, organization, compliance. And so there's a huge infrastructure in place for any organization. And so one of the values of the Microsoft approach with Copilot is to say, not only will we access all of the data you've ever put, say, in Microsoft 365, but actually all of that intellectual property, all of that operational intelligence is recognized, preserved, and reinforced, ultimately amplified. And so it turns out to be an advantage because as anyone who's read the popular press, generative AI is an amplifier. So if you have access to something you shouldn't, but maybe people just assumed it was so obscure, so who cares? What are the odds you'll find it? Well, a generative AI engine will definitely find it. And so all of a sudden you'll find information popping up that maybe you don't have the rights to, or should be somewhat confidential, or right. So, and then you have all issues around ethics and responsible use of AI. All of these things are deal breakers for serious enterprises, right? If I'm an individual just experimenting, who cares, right? I just want to learn and explore and discover. If I'm a business, I can't afford that type. So I'll circle back, and we're almost out of time, and ask you to make some closing remarks, but I want to circle back to your one of your points, which was encourage and foster a sense of, I forget the exact words, but essentially discovery, innovation, experimentation. And that's great as long as the people doing that can feel safe doing it, that they're not going to inadvertently create some sort of privacy, security, compliance disaster or operational disaster. And so that's why that intersection is so critical. If you want to be creative and exploratory, you need a safe way to do it. So anyway, that's my soapbox. And David, I'll give you the last few minutes, and we can make a little time if there's a question or two. Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
Well, I just want to introduce a term here that I want people to think about when they're designing the application environment experience for people. Indispensable. Is what you're doing, is the thing that you're creating, and the thing that you're working on, something that people are going to find absolutely indispensable who do the job that you're really doing this work for. So think about call center reps again. Are they going to find this indispensable? And if you're putting in place generative AI and other kinds of tools, is it being done in such a way that is really additive to their overall experience? It reduces the cognitive load of them doing their jobs. The more it does that, the more indispensable they're going to find it. And so I think it's important to sort of think along those terms and along those lines. So I guess that's the last thing that I would say is just think about the term, what is going to be indispensable to these people that we're doing this for, and look at everything through that lens. I've got more stories for that, but we're out of time.
We are in fact exactly at time.
Yeah.
So as I said, when I opened, we wanted to race through what we learned to get to what you can do about what we learned. Here are some links for everyone who registered. We'll send a follow-up to with this deck, as well as these links. Next week is a significant public-facing event for Microsoft Ignite. I encourage you to register. You can attend remotely. There'll be lots and lots of material on these subjects. You can follow the link below that to actually begin accessing software, downloading development toolkits yourself. And as I promised, the actual paper with a little bit of interactive capability that we've been referring to is that third link. So we are at time. David, thank you so much, not only for today, but for the great work you put in to create this material. It has some lasting value in my opinion. So thank you.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.